Welcome to Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg. We're here to explore the imposter syndrome that haunts creatives, delving into how it affects their lives and work. Join us as we chat with authors and artists about creativity, self-doubt, featuring imposter characters in their stories, and the occasional imposter who pops up in their day-to-day lives.
Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Sonica Mazursky to the podcast. Sonica is the digital creator and book reviewer behind The Reading Beauty, which features live chats with some of your favorite authors. She's an avid reader with a passion for thrillers and suspense novels. Sonica started reading at the age of 3 and enjoys the escape the fiction world offers after a long day at the office. When she's not buried in her latest read, Sonica cherishes moments with her husband and 2 dogs. You can find her on Instagram at The Reading Beauty. That is the_reading_beauty. Sonica, welcome to Imposter Hour. Thank you for coming up.
Thanks, guys.
Welcome.
I'm so excited to be here.
So great.
We're very excited to have you. For our listeners, a little bit of background. We were lucky enough to be on an IG Live with Sonica in 2020 when our second book and our pandemic book came out, In Case of Emergency. And we had such a lovely time that we wanted to revisit and turn the tables a little bit on you this time. So you're on the hot seat. We're throwing the questions out, but you're kind of the pro in this. So I think we'll probably pick up some pointers from you along the way.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, and I'm excited for the questions. I'm ready for it.
Perfect.
Well, we'll start with one you're probably ready for, given the name of the podcast and if you've listened to any of the other episodes. But, we would love to know more about you and where imposter syndrome shows up in your life.
I mean, being here tonight, I feel like a bit of an imposter. I'll be honest. I am simply a reader who loves thrillers and loves authors like yourselves and your work. And I often find myself pinching my arm or something just to make sure that it's real when I'm around you guys, whether it's at an event like Thriller Fest or Hampton's Whodunit or Montreal Mystery Festival or any sort of bookish event. I feel like a bit of an imposter because I'm just a reader and I'm always questioning, should I be here? Is this just for authors? But you all are so welcoming and so incredible with your readers that, I don't know about everyone else, but I can safely say that I have never felt out of place, although I do feel like a bit of an imposter because when I'm in the midst of conversations with you guys, I wonder, do they really want to talk to me, the reader, or each other, the authors? So bit of imposter syndrome in that front when it comes to the influencer world, because I don't see myself as an influencer per se. I'm just a reader and I love to read books and I love to read thrillers that you all write.
Okay. Well, I mean, if it helps at all, I would say, and I'm not going to speak for Liz, but we have spoken about this on many occasions. I definitely have a very similar feeling to that when we are at conventions or at friends' author talks or watching panels or whatever. There's a lot of that kind of, what am I doing in this room? Because these are people that are, it's funny, they're colleagues, but at the same time, they're also people that I admire and continue to learn from as an author. So I think we also have, even as writers, have the imposter syndrome of what are we doing in this room? I think there's
No, I agree with that. I think that's really the kind of core of why we started this podcast. It's interesting to hear you talk about being just a reader. I mean, first of all, I think reading is so incredible. And it's been, like a lifeline for me in so many parts of my life. And it's ultimately, I think, how I learned to write and wanted to be a writer. But as far as, what I know about you, you're not just reading books. You are talking to authors. You're featuring authors on Instagram, which is a huge asset in a, continually shrinking world of places to discover new books and authors, which is huge. And then also you just listed like 4 book events that I have not been to. I think the fact that Sonica, you're willing to kind of go outside your comfort zone in order to meet authors in real life and hear, people read or talk about their books, that's a step further than just being a reader. And I would love to hear from you, if you identify as an introvert, because that's a common thread we've been talking about on the show, and then, second to that, what kind of motivates you to get from like out from behind the book and like immerse yourself in the actual events and the parties and all of those things?
Well, I'll start off by saying I'm an extroverted introvert, and I'm sure people say that all the time, but it's the truth. When you get to know me, it's like you've known me forever, and I get quite comfortable very quickly with people in terms of just comfort level talking to people, as you've seen on my IG lives. The whole IG live thing and the featuring of authors, that really was a passion project for me during COVID, when COVID first hit. I'm in Canada, so I don't know if you guys know this, but we don't have that many bookish events. Like, New York is the hub, the epicenter of it all. Also happens to be one of my favorite cities. So it's great that the events tend to happen there frequently. And yeah, to your point, like, I dragged myself out of my comfort zone. The first time was when I went to Book Expo in New York City in 2018. It had been the first time I ever did any sort of bookish event. A few of other bookstagrammers and myself never met in person, agreed on Instagram that we were all going to go and do this Book Expo, and we all met in New York for the very first time. And I can safely say that it was like we'd known each other our whole lives. So I guess that's, the common theme. You put a bunch of extroverted introverts together and you've got a group of friends that have felt like they've known each other forever. So that was sort of the beginning of my bookish adventures, if you will. The following year, I went to VoucherCon in Dallas. And again, that was another extreme out of my comfort zone, traveling to Dallas on my own to meet people I've never met in person. And of course, to see some of my favorite authors who are kind of like celebrities. I don't know if you guys know that about yourselves, but at least for me, I feel like you're celebrities. And when I'm surrounded by you, that's sort of the fangirl in me. Some girls are into going to Taylor Swift's concert. I mean, I am a Swiftie out as well, but I'd much rather, see and spend time with some of my favorite thriller authors like yourselves. So, that sort of was the trend in the bookish adventures. And then came the IG Lives. Really, I was forced into that because I was so ready to go on to my next bookish adventure. I was set to go to Sacramento in October for VoucherCon. And of course, COVID happened and the world just shut down. And I was looking at a way, or an opportunity, if you will, to sort of connect readers and authors, especially Canadian readers, because we don't get to go to all these events. We don't have the events that you guys all have in the US. So I really wanted to bring authors and readers together in a way that was easy for everyone. And since we were all at home in our pajamas 24/7, I thought, why not do something on Instagram? There's this Instagram Live feature. I'm going to take advantage of it. So I started sort of feeling out authors that I've been reading over the years, who I've built some sort of rapport over Instagram. And sure enough, they all started saying yes. So I was doing like 2, 3, 4 IG lives a week, starting in April of when COVID first hit. And it was amazing. It was incredible to see not only the interest by the authors, but how much the readers loved it. It was a great opportunity for you in the comfort of your own home during a time that was really uncertain, and we weren't really sure what was going to happen with that whole pandemic. And really just people wanted something to hang on to and really have, that comfort in. And I thought, this is the way to do it. These IG lives, I'm going to bring bookish events to everyone's home. So here we are, and I've been doing them sporadically now because, life got busy once the pandemic died down. But I'm still doing them infrequently, but still doing them. And again, it's simply just a passion project that really took launch during a time that I think we were all hoping, the world was going to get back to normal sooner rather than later. So that's sort of the background on it.
That's beautiful. I mean, it sounds like you kind of took that community you had found with fellow readers and then embraced that spirit through a time, as you said, that everyone felt kind of alone, isolated, anxious, nervous, scared, what have you. That's a beautiful way to kind of continue to build that bridge, I think. And you are very generous, obviously, with thriller and suspense authors as well in terms of giving them some shine. What is that what brought you to those genres specifically? What kind of pulls you to that area of fiction?
So I've been reading thriller suspense since I was a younger kid. I
Okay.
started with, R.L. Stine, Goosebumps. Of course, I read My Sweet Valley High and Babysitter's Club, but I started getting drawn more to the Nancy Drews and the Goosebumps and the R.L. Stine, and then I just stuck with it. And I actually went on a bit of a hiatus during university where, I was reading for school, so it was too much heavy content. So I turned to some rom-coms and soft women's fiction, if you will. And then in my late 20s, I returned to the thriller world with Gone Girl. That was sort of the book, the gateway book that brought me back to the dark side. And for me, I think thrillers are just so entertaining. They're just a great escape, and they're books that you can pick up and put down if life gets in the way. And you don't lose a beat, right? You don't miss a beat with thrillers. You either kind of know what's going to happen, or you expect something to happen, and it just entices you right away. But for me, it's the entertaining factor. Like, I love scary movies, huge scary movie and slasher movies for sure. But I won't read horror, which is weird. I can't explain it. But yeah, the thriller thing for me, I mean, as I said, starting it as a young kid, but mostly because they're entertaining and they're just an easy escape from reality every now and then. And I can get through a thriller in a day or two, whereas some of the other genres, it takes me a while because the chapters are longer or the content is a bit heavier and you really have to focus, and you can't miss a beat with those types of genres. And I just love all of you thriller authors. Like, you're all so unassuming. You guys all write some pretty dark stuff, and you're all the nicest people I've ever met, which is, I think, the biggest pull for me as of late, because I've met most of my favorites already. And I don't understand it. I don't know where you guys pull this stuff from. And it just keeps me going, and it keeps me motivated to keep reading, because I'm so fascinated by the worlds that you create for readers like myself, not only to escape reality, but also to get entertained.
Yeah.
I'm laughing because this is the second time in 2 days it's come up, the kind of like contrast between thriller writers who are nice people and who write like completely depraved and decidedly not nice characters. And I think that there's a lot of, kind of parallel between, I think that makes sense. I'm not articulating it well, but I think you've hit on something, which is, it's been my experience too, that thriller writers, horror writers, even true crime authors, people who write nonfiction, have a soft side. And I think it has something to do with empathy and being able to get into the minds of characters, no matter how dark they are or depraved. I would love to hear what both of you think about, like, what the possible corollaries are between, seemingly nice. I feel like Greg and I are who we say we are. But, we love to write characters who are, not who they say they are. So what do you guys think in terms of, like, what's the relation there?
Greg, do you want to go first, or do you want me to?
Yeah, I'll jump in. I think part of it, I think there's a cathartic aspect to being able to work out a lot of the psychological things that you see in the world around you that are maybe unsettling, unnerving, terrifying, fascinating. And it's almost, the writing process to me is almost a way of filtering that and sifting through it and figuring out kind of the motivations, right? Figuring out the universality of human behavior and instinct, and kind of seeing that we all have access to all of these things, this whole spectrum of behavior and motivation, whether it's, gentle, loving, depraved, everything in the middle. So I think really honestly what it is it does, it's funny because on paper it seems like we would all be, complete like head cases, but I think that the process of being able to kind of work that out in a safe space on the page actually allows us to maybe to your point, Liz, I think it really the empathy thing I think is a big thing. I think being able to do that actually offers you access to deeper empathy and compassion for the kind of the human, condition, if that makes sense.
Mm.
So I have two sort of theories, and one of them is a bit of a cheat because, it's based on my interviews with authors and what you guys have all told me over the years as to why you write this dark stuff. So I'll talk a bit about that first. And a lot of the authors I've interviewed have said the same thing. It's their opportunity to sort of explore their greatest fears, which I find fascinating. Because, your mind can get so dark sometimes, if you let it, and you can go down those rabbit holes, but it's in a safe space. So I can appreciate sort of that aspect. And then my own personal thing is you guys just love to get dark, and it's an opportunity to do it, and the sky's the limit. There's no, I think that's fun. Like I mean, I'm not a writer by any means, and I just want to keep reading, and I love to just keep reading. But I could see it being such an appeal for you guys in terms of you can take this idea and just run with it, and there's no rules, and you could do whatever you want with these characters in these situations. So it's kind of fun to be on the receiving end of it, but I'd love to sort of have a one-on-one with one of the darkest authors I know and just kind of dissect that a bit more, because again, I'll say it, like, all of the thriller writers I've met have all been on the outside and the inside beautiful people. So it's crazy that you guys have such dark thoughts. But again, I guess that's the excitement behind it, is you can do whatever you want because it's your story and there's no rules, right? And it's fake, so it's fiction. So why not go the extra mile?
Right.
It's like it's therapy on the page that costs us, time and not money.
Yeah, it's right there. And you're getting paid for it, actually. So it might not be
that
bad of a deal.
True. You're right. Actually, when it's going well, it's a good life hack. It's a good life hack all around. I'm wondering, you mentioned in your bio that you started reading at 3 years old.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what that first book was, that first kind of gateway drug that got you hooked, or maybe some of the early titles that really kind of fueled your passion?
I don't. This whole 3-year-old thing comes from my mom. And I asked her, like, what do you mean I started reading at 3? And she's like, well, I read to you every night. And, it came to a point where you just started reading the books back to me. So I don't know if it was just memorization. I'm going to go with no, I was just starting to read at 3 and I was very accelerated. But that's how sort of she tells me, because I've questioned it over the years. And like, how can you say I started reading at 3? Like, 3-year-olds can't read. And she's like, no, you did. You started memorizing the book, I think, and you would read it back. So, all the traditional fairy tales, Sleeping Beauty, Beauty and the Beast, Cinderella. The Little Mermaid was probably my favorite, I have to say. But yeah, it was simply that. My mom read to me every single night, and there came a point in that year that I'm a late baby, so I think it was probably the year I was turning 4. But I just say 3 because it sounds cooler. And yeah, she just said I started reading the books back, and then I refused to let her read after that. I wanted to be the one reading to her, so that's sort of how it all kicked off.
Nice.
I was just thinking about the fact that I've been kind of becoming refamiliarized with the stories from our youths because of having a son who's 2. So we've started to watch a lot of Disney movies and read a lot of children's books. And one thing I'm realizing that I didn't, certainly when I was younger, I didn't realize is, especially with Disney, how much darkness there is in those stories. And I know that they're adapted from, the Brothers Grimm and Hans Christian Andersen. And, the origin stories are incredibly dark and violent, and they are kind of, cleaned up. But still, you have, a lot of dead parents. Or you have kidnapped princesses or princesses in comas or in towers. I mean, there's some dark shit that happens in these stories that I think is lost on kids. But as an adult and a thriller writer revisiting them, I'm like, it's no wonder. It's no wonder that we ended up writing, some of this stuff because I think what makes these stories so redeeming by the end is the crazy amounts of high stakes that the characters overcome. And that's not a question. That was a thought I had when you were talking about your early reading, but you also mentioned Gillian Flynn's Gone Girl and that being like a gateway back into thrillers after university, which lends me to the question, as a voracious reader and as someone who probably reads like most of the thrillers that come out in a given year, what do you think it was about that book in particular that just made it so rampantly popular? And what was your experience reading that book that made it so satisfying to you that it like brought you back to the genre?
For me, and it continues to be why I love thrillers, is when an author can flip the switch and it just is not the story you thought you were reading. That kind of head turn or whatever it is you want to call it, where you're just like, what the fuck just happened? That for me is totally, sorry, I don't know if I could swear on here, but
we encourage it.
That is what really got my eyes kind of wide when I was reading Gone Girl, and why I continue today to read thrillers is the books that the switch just flips. And you read the first part of the book and it's one version of a story, and then the second part starts and it just completely turns you around. And a few authors have continuously been able to surprise me and do that. That's just like the best part of a thriller, is when the author can flip the switch and just has you pull the rug right under you and you don't see it coming.
I'm curious, as you are obviously, a seasoned reader, and I'm sure by now there are certain tropes that, we all see in thrillers that, something gets popular and then it gets kind of redone a bit. Or, part of it, I think also is just that there are only so many ways to kind of build that machine where you can then kind of, pull the rug out. How often would you say these days you really truly have that experience of just that switch flipping and you're really kind of caught out there?
I'm going to say more than not, because I don't know, maybe I don't pay attention as much where I don't see it. I know people are like, oh, I saw that coming. And I don't know. I don't look for it because I want to be surprised and I want to see where the author's going to take it. So more than not, I'm still surprised. And even when I'm not, it's okay because the author still executed it so much better than I planned in my head. So, the 3 out of 10 books where I'm like, oh, I know what's going to happen. It may happen, but it's never as good as the way you guys write it. So it's still fun to read and it's still exciting. And I'm going to say more than not, I'm still surprised. The cliches are the cliches, but it's the way you guys execute it that make it different. And for me, that's what stands out, is how you sort of interpreted that trope or that twist and you put it into your own way, in your own kind of fashion, and just, dazzled me still.
That's wonderful. I'm finding that too. I mean, I've been reading a lot more than I was in the past 2 years. Now that my son's a little bit older, and doing this podcast has been great because it's been, an excuse to read more for the guests who are coming on. And I love what you just said about, even if it is a trope, you're kind of allowing yourself to suspend your disbelief and just go with where the writer wants to take you. And I think that's such a wonderful way to just experience a book, as opposed to, I think what I fell into for a while was like, I want to figure it out. I want to feel like that self-satisfaction of having figured it out before the end. But it's like, why am I doing that? There's like a writer who put a lot of craft into the words, into the shaping of this. And, whether or not the end ends the way I think it's going to, that's not how it's supposed to go. The writer was very intentional. And I'm glad you said that, because I'm curious from a writer's point of view, what really speaks to readers. Like, is it plot? Is it character? Is it a certain aspect of thrillers, whether it's like domestic thriller or locked door mystery? What kind of is like the perfect confluence of elements in a book for you?
I really love psychological thrillers, like the mind fucks, because those are the ones that it's the characters that you're not suspecting that just flip the switch, or it's just there's a difference between I'm not a huge locked room mystery, just because those I tend to figure out. Those are pretty easy as one by one, people start dying. The pool gets smaller, so you kind of figure those out a little quicker. But the psychological thrillers always get me because it's usually never the person I think it's going to be, because I'm always wrong with those. And I love seeing how it comes to life. Like, it's like watching a show. Like, we watched Presumed Innocent with Jake Gyllenhaal recently. And my husband kept saying, I know who it is. And I'm like, just stop. You're going to ruin it. Because I want to be surprised. I mean, and it never ends up being who you think it's going to be. At least for me, I'm not good at this game. But it's fun kind of going through the motions and seeing it through to the end, to see what is, and then it's just more exciting and more surprising. I want to be surprised. I like to be surprised. I don't want to figure it out. I've had a hard day at work. Like, I don't need to be solving mysteries and detective story. Like, that's not why I'm reading. I'm reading to see, how messed up my favorite authors are going to make these characters and flip the switch on me and take these storylines to another level. That's sort of what I'm looking for and what I'm craving when I pick up a book. I'm not looking to figure it out. I don't have time for
that. Yeah. Let us do the work.
Right?
Yeah. Speaking of doing the work, actually, let me kind of flip this on you for a moment, because I'm curious. We're kind of newbies. I mean, Liz and I are a dozen episodes or so into this endeavor of ours that we decided to jump into, sort of on a lark, but like we're having a blast doing it. You've obviously been doing this for a while. I'm curious, being kind of a veteran at this point with the author interview setup, how has your kind of interviewing style evolved over the years?
Honestly, when I look back to some of the first ones I did, I was so stiff, and you could tell I was scared or nervous, or I was reading the questions question by question. And now I want them to be more of a conversation. So I set up some questions just, raw for me to have as a guide, but I don't focus on them. I kind of let the questions take me where they're going to take me depending on the answers. And sometimes I don't ask all the same questions that are on that list because the conversation's taken me elsewhere. And that really came to life for me earlier this year when I was at Montreal Mystery Festival, which was a first year inaugural festival in Montreal, Canada. And I moderated my very first panel. And I was so worried because I wasn't sure if it was going to be the same as doing an IG Live. And everyone's like, but it is the same. I'm like, no, like they're in the same room with me. There's 3 of them. Like, how am I going to do this? What if it's like dead silence in between questions? And so I started rewatching some of my earlier episodes and then some of my later episodes. And that's when I saw the evolution. I became more of a conversation with them as opposed to question, answer, question, answer. And not all interviews are the same, depending on who the interviewee is. You do question, answer, right? If they're just not engaged enough. But for the most part, I try to make it a conversation. And I try to jump off little things that they've said to build on new questions or new conversation starters.
I think that actually applies to writing as well. I mean, we talk about that from a writing perspective is, you can kind of plot out a story, but where the magic starts to happen, when it really starts cooking, is when the character starts to speak to you a little more and they start to guide the ship. And that can be a really kind of exciting moment in that story when you've kind of laid the groundwork, but then the thing takes on a life of its own and breaks open. So it's an interesting parallel that you're talking about from kind of both sides of that table. Yeah.
So are you guys pantsers then, or plotters? Would you consider yourself pantsers or plotters?
it's kind of,
We're pantsers.
yeah, we're
Do you
pants.
think we're plotters?
Well, no. I was gonna kind of talk about the evolution because it is kind of interesting in our
Right.
specific case because we're co-writers, right?
Mhm.
Liz and I,
Mm-hmm.
um, for our first book, we completely went off of like a pantser format, right? We talked about this book. We were both having kind of a, our own drama that we were, having been friends for a long time, we were helping each other through. And we had been talking for years about maybe working on something together, long form, a project, a novel length thing. We were out to dinner one night. We go through all this stuff. We're kind of talking through, we start spitballing. We both go our separate ways. And in the morning, I wake up to an email from Liz, and it's the first chapter of what would become The Woman Inside. And so that really dictated our whole writing style, is going back and forth and volleying, and we were writing from different perspectives. So a lot of it was like she'd write something, throw it my way, I'd write something, throw it back, and we're part of the fun ended up being trying to kind of stump one another as we went. Mm-hmm. As we went forward in the process with subsequent books, because we're working with a publisher and because they want to have some idea, the first book we turn in a full book, right? So they kind of know what they get. For subsequent books, they want to see a little bit of an outline. And what we tend to do is we tend to do kind of 3-act structure, and then we'll give a little bit of just like a thumbnail, like kind of a chapter by chapter thumbnail of this is probably kind of how this would go. This will be the action, kind of, whatever the character's doing. But then inevitably, and Liz and I kind of laugh about this, inevitably, like halfway through, we completely go off that script anyway. So we really are pantsers, but because we're dealing with a publisher and an agent and an editor, and we have to like work a little bit of plotting into it, but then we pretty much go off. We take the off ramp, halfway down the road.
Right.
So, yeah. Is that more, Liz? Would you say more or less? Is that kind of how it's?
Yeah, no. And I think it's great that you answered that question because, Sonica, I would say that, I'm a pantser and I would never have been a plotter if it wasn't for Greg. Like every project I've done solo, I've done as a pantser. That's why they've never been published because they never get finished. And when Greg and I were kind of tasked with like encapsulating what our second and third and fourth books were going to be, we would have these like very long sessions where we would spitball, and then miraculously Greg would be able to sit down and like synthesize things into like bite-sized pieces because he's like a very economical writer and I'm an overwriter. So I think that I'm fascinated when we talk to authors who are very like decidedly in one camp or the other, because I feel like it's just like become very fluid for us. Because I think there's, two different people with different styles writing in one space. But, I love the idea of being able to like plot and have an outline. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we've ever stayed on script because it's just not as much fun.
Yeah. And Sonica, to your point as well, I think to bring it kind of back around, I think that is really where you get into the meat of whatever the thing is, whether it's the story you're writing or the interview you're conducting with, the author you want to talk to. It's like, that's when you can kind of get off the script and really kind of get into the good stuff too. So yeah,
right.
It's a lot of fun.
I was wondering, because I'm thinking about now how long you've been doing your book coverage. There are so many good books that come out in any given month, across genres. So how do you decide what you're going to review, who you're going to interview? I know you have like a full-time career, aside. This is a passion project. Just logistically, how do you read enough to do this? And, when you were doing it kind of more regularly, how did you decide? That's like embarrassment of riches when you get book mail and you have like 5 books you want to read.
It's never an easy decision on what to read next. I'll say that 8 years later, I'm still like a kid at a candy store because I'm just like, so many options. But I guess I'll scale it back to, when I started the interviews at the, beginning of COVID. I started it with just books that I had read already that were coming out in the next couple months or few months, but I knew I had read them. So I used that sort of as my portfolio to start because I'd read the books. There wasn't any extra work on my end, and other than coming up with some questions, and they were standard questions that I just asked everyone at every interview. And I tried touching different genres because I didn't want to seem biased, and I wanted to give other genres a chance, especially during COVID, in terms of bringing readers and authors together. But today, I think the selection is, at least for the interviews, it's more based on time. I have a job that is keeping me very busy, a personal life that also keeps me busy. And so reading, I want it to stay fun, and I want it to be, something that I enjoy doing at the end of a long day, or at the beginning of my day. I try to get in a couple of chapters before getting ready for work. So I do gravitate to, my favorite authors, or, a debut author in the thriller genre, because those are always fun, and can be different and new and exciting, fresh takes on the genre. But yeah, I guess I don't really have a magic sort of recipe on what I pick. I'm a bit of a mood reader, so I'll gravitate towards something. If it's not really kind of jiving, then I'll put it down and try something else. But I do try to, my first and foremost are my favorite authors. I usually hit those books first if I know they're coming out, and then sort of see what else I have on my cart that I haven't touched that I need to open sooner rather than later, before I get blacklisted off some publisher lists. But
Right.
it's tough. It's a tough life. It's, first world problems, what to pick to read next, but it's the best problem. And I don't ever want to not have this problem. So
yeah. One of them good problems. You're so great at, representing for Canada and showing love. And I wonder, we have some authors that we really enjoy who are Canadian authors, Robin Harding and Tessa Weigert and Jennifer Hillier. You are more kind of keyed into the pulse of that. I would love to know, for both ourselves and also our listeners, are there any Canadian authors who are maybe under the radar, or any debuts coming out that you're excited about? Anyone you just want to kind of give a little extra love and attention to?
I'm not sure about debuts on the Canadian side, but, in addition to the three that you already mentioned, Hannah Mary McKinnon, I think she's underestimated. She's pretty dark. Samantha Bailey is really cool. She's also an awesome person. So you just want to read her books because she's so much fun. Rosnay, I think too, is also an author that I think people, underestimate. She just had a book come out earlier this year, The Offing. She's also an incredible person. I'm just trying to think of all the ones that I just saw recently. So those, authors, I don't know, I love my Canadian authors because they're so fun. And now that I get to see them more, because I either live close to them or I keep in close contact with them, and we're doing more Canadian type things in terms of the bookish events. Those three, I think, in addition to the ones that you've talked about, I think would probably be the ones that I would shout out. Oh, and Daniel Callow. He's also really good. He's got a cool story, though. He is an ER doctor who writes books.
Oh.
I don't know how he.
Oh my God.
Does he write specifically?
No pressure, guys. He's sorry.
Does he specifically write medical thrillers, or is he not in that genre?
He does. He's done the odd medical thriller, but yeah, he will pull from some of his work. I mean, high level, not exactly, but yeah, he's a fascinating guy, because I don't know how you are an emergency room doctor in an actual hospital in Canada and be able to write books, and he writes them so well. He also had a book earlier this year, High Society, and I think it was like the ketamine, or it was like an addiction group, and they all had sort of their own addictions, and the treatment was ketamine therapy, and he actually used that because it was something that they were trialing, or I don't know, he was studying. So he's a fascinating guy. And I think for me, it's because I don't know how he does it. I don't know how he has a family life, personal life, is an ER doctor. I can't stop coming back to that, because that just boggles my mind. And then he writes books.
Yeah, that's one of those how many hours in the day type of conundrums, I feel like.
Yeah, I don't know how he does
It sounds like we need to get him on the show. I have lots of questions.
Sure.
Yeah. You need to talk to him seriously, because and he's so humble. Like you would never, like, he's just like, no, I just, I do it. I make time. And we're like, how? Your doctor is not just like, a receptionist job or like an admin job. Like, it's a legit career. Like,
Yeah.
And the hours. Well, I mean, the hours are, you work those crazy shifts too. Those like 24 hours, those overnights. I mean, I can't imagine having enough battery left to have a creative outlet where you're sustaining that consistently enough to be writing, books regularly.
And I'm sure he's busy because like Canadian hospitals are overrun and just like bogged down. So sometimes it's just one ER doctor each night looking after, I don't know. Yeah, I'll have to pay attention to when you do that episode, because I'm still curious. I've talked to him a couple of times and I still don't understand how he does it.
Right. Something we don't.
You'll have to introduce us, Sonica. See, you're a connector too. So.
I will.
I want to go back to, you mentioned doing your first panel moderation, which is so cool. And I love hearing that when, especially influencers and reviewers do the panels, because I think you guys always have the best questions. What was the panel that you moderated, and what were some of the like more surprising revelations that came out of it?
So it was a West Coast crime panel featuring Robin Harding, Rosnay, and Daniel Callow, because they're all on the West Coast. And it was fun. It was just, honestly, people were coming up to us after the panel just talking about how it was like a conversation that they all felt like they were a part of. And the three of them are hilarious. So they just like feed off of each other too. And that sort of, for me, that panel was really a breaking point in terms of me realizing like these interviews are more than just interviews. I started looking at them more as conversation with friends about, my favorite book. And so it was fun. It was a lot of banter back and forth. And, we were all kind of nervous in our own little way. But you'd never notice, apparently, according to the audience. I was sweating, so I don't know how people didn't notice. But no, it was cool. And like I said, that whole imposter thing comes back, right? Especially during that panel. Like, I've known these authors for years and I've seen them at other events, but I was sweating and I was nervous. And so it just never ends, right? It never goes away. And again, I had to pinch myself like, oh my God, I'm interviewing Robin Harding, Rosnay, and Daniel Callow. This is amazing. So yeah, like it was a turning point for me, I think, because I started looking at them a little differently in terms of the interviews, as opposed to interviews, and more around conversations with friends, which I think has been a really light outlook for me in terms of not being nervous and just taking them as conversations with friends.
Right. Yeah, I think it's one of those things that for all of us to bear in mind, that it's, I think us as authors on a panel with a moderator, we're probably ourselves as nervous as the moderator, because we each confer a certain amount of kind of legitimacy on the other. We write books, so we're legitimate. You are a reader and very savvy, and have questions prepared and everything, so you're legitimate, and we're all feeling some version of kind of, what are we doing here? So it's just, if you can kind of get everyone together and band together on the what are we all doing here thing, then it becomes much more, as you said, of a kind of a community spirit with it. I think it's great.
Yeah, and we did Thriller Fest this year, and we were both on panels. And the thing I realized, I get really nervous before any kind of public speaking. I have for a long time, even when I was an actor, even when I had to present at like sales conferences and publishing. And, that imposter syndrome really comes up, because it's like, what am I nervous about? I'm nervous about not sounding intelligent. I'm nervous about like falling on my face. Like, ultimately, I'm nervous like about what other people think of me. And the thing that comes up, especially on like panels or industry events, is, I don't want to say the wrong thing. And when I kind of get into this mindset of like not saying something, it totally like erases my brain of what I can say or what I think. It's like just being careful and also speaking out loud versus writing something on the page and being able to like tweak and edit it. I feel confident when I can write something and look at it and see how it sounds. But when it's just coming out of my mouth, I have that like inner monologue, like, right now, you're talking too much. This isn't making sense. Stop rambling. And on panels, because you just never can anticipate what the person to the left or the right of you is going to say, I get total like analysis paralysis. It's just when we did the panels this last Thriller Fest, the woman next to me answered a question with like a very researched history of the subject we were talking about, and my brain was like hearing it and then everything else fell out of it. It was like my turn and I'm like, where am I? Who am I? What is happening? And I think if more people like you are, like if they express that fear, and then it takes some of the power out of it, and then like as you're talking about it, can become more of a conversation and less of like a pissing contest, you know and that's my hope for the next panel or book event we do, that I can kind of like step aside from that, because I think when you get into a flow with people who are all there for the same thing, it can be really beautiful and really exciting. So there's not a question there. That's just part of my contribution to the conversation.
No, I think you raise a good point though. And, I'd even add, like, when I started doing away with the scripted questions and scripted answers, I felt so much more free during these conversations. And because I do find, even with work presentations, when I used to present in corporate, when I had it all mapped out in my notes, I would lose and if you lose your point on those notes when you're at that podium, it just throws you. So I stopped doing it. I would just put bullet points of like 2 or 3 words that I wanted to capture, or ideas that I wanted to touch on, or topics. And that's it. And I just kind of freestyled it. And I noticed my presentations and my speeches and my interviews were just getting better because of that. Because I think that was paralyzing me, was having that script. And then you get so nervous, you lose the line on the script that you're at, and then everything just goes down the drain. So I stopped doing it, and it's actually helped a lot. So I don't know if that's something you guys want to try, but I mean, it did work, and it seems to be a lot more freeing and liberating, if you will, when you're in these conversations, and the nervousness kind of subsides a little bit because you're not held to a script or memorizing a line, or I don't know. I found that that's really helped.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, the way we've been kind of approaching this is we'll come up with a handful of questions that we sort of have in the back pocket, a little bit of a kind of a safety net, below the tightrope. But then again, usually once it gets flowing pretty well, then we're more in the moment of, where's the conversation going naturally, and let's doing that. And I think that that works on panels. And when you have someone such as yourself who can come in and who's comfortable riffing and being able to do that, it also it sets the energy in a certain way where everyone feels like they can riff. And that's really, I think, what the audience wants, right? They don't want the scripted, prescribed questions that everyone gets, in every book launch interview or panel or whatever. They want to just like, all right, what makes these people tick? How do you click into that kind of thing? It sounds like you're enjoying it a lot, or enjoyed doing it with Montreal. Do you have plans for anything else coming up? Are you kind of lined up to do something next year there? Do you have any kind of interest in getting yourself back in a moderating position?
Yeah, I'm definitely heading back to Montreal next May, May 23rd to the 25th. I'm actually helping organize this time. This is their second year, so I should introduce you guys. They did such a great job. They brought some incredible talent last year, and I'm excited for what they're going to do, or this year, what they're going to do next year, but definitely going to be moderating again. Trying to tap into the US kind of moderating world. It's tough because I'm here, but I mean, I'm going to keep doing Montreal as long as they'll let me. And maybe one day I'll moderate at Thriller Fest or the Hamptons Who Done It. That's like my wish list right now.
Well, I noticed this year with Hamptons Whodunit specifically, there was a little bit of cross-pollination from Iceland noir to Hamptons Whodunit. And I know that with Montreal, it just kicked off last year, but hopefully it can be a similar situation where maybe there's a bit of cross-pollination with Montreal and, BoucherCon or Thriller Fest or something like that, so we can kind of keep crossing those borders and getting everyone in the mix. It's a nice way to do it.
I keep telling them who my favorites are, so they're going to try to keep it mostly Canadian, but I've snuck in a few Americans, so you guys watch out.
What if we write about Canada? Can that kind of get us in, like the back door?
I'm sure they're open to it.
We can't pander though. We don't want to pander. That's not fair.
I know.
They're on our merits.
That's a good point.
I can help you with the geography stuff, or writing a scene in a Canadian city. Use me as your guinea pig.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you'll be our reader for anything and all things Canadian. Although, as Greg mentioned, there are so many wonderful Canadian thriller writers that we've gotten to know. So what we could do like a kind of like a crowdsource. Did we get this right? I'm wondering. You mentioned your love of psychological thrillers in particular, and obviously we love them as well, and tend toward that direction. I would love to hear from your point of view what makes a really awesome like imposter character. You talked about like flipping the switch on the reader, and I think Gone Girl is a great example. There's some books where you don't see it coming. The imposter characters are so well done. Another one I'm thinking of is Fingersmith by Sarah Waters, and that may qualify more as like a literary thriller, but it's one of those books like Gone Girl where I just was, my mouth was wide. I was so surprised. What do you think makes like a great imposter character?
I love the unreliable narrator. I'm not gonna lie. I think they're fun because they're the ones that you have to be careful with, right? You as a reader and probably as a writer, because you just don't know what they're going to do or say. And for me, that's entertaining. And I know that they're the ones I'm going to keep an eye on, or at least a pulse on while I'm reading. But I also love when the author doesn't make them the one that flips the switch, because then it just totally throws you off because you're expecting it to be that unreliable narrator. But I do love a good unreliable narrator. I think they're fun to read. I mean, we have enough reliable narrators in life. I don't need to read a reliable narrator. So that's why I like the unreliable ones in books, because, it's fiction. It's supposed to be crazy and fun and not real, right? So I do love the unreliable narrator. And I love when an author portrays a character. So I like when the authors don't tell you who the narrator is, but you think it's the villain, or and then when it all comes out in the end, you're like, damn it, that's not who I thought it was. And it's always the least expecting person, of course. But no, I love when you guys take a character and you've made them so dark when they're narrating their version of the story or whatever is going on, but we don't know who they are. And then in the end, when you bring them forward, it's never the person you think it is. So I love how you guys are able to do that, especially do that in a way where I didn't catch it. And maybe that's a me thing. I don't know. Other readers might be more sophisticated. Like I said, I don't go into these trying to solve everything and figure it all out. But no, I think I like being surprised. And I like when, it's never the ones that you think it's going to be. It's always the less obvious characters that are the ones to watch out for. And you guys hide them so well.
It sounds like the way you're talking about it sounds like you have a very healthy relationship to kind of thrillers, in the sense that you're able to kind of, you look to them for escape, to be able to kind of, unwind after a long day at work, and being able to kind of put that aside and do that. But I wonder, being such a, again, such a consummate reader of the genre, does it ever kind of affect the way you look at the real world around you, or certain people or things like that? Does it ever kind of change up your mindset a little bit, or your expectations?
I'm laughing because my husband's always saying, "You read too many thrillers." Whenever like I'll like say something and like because I will hypothesize and what if this happens and what if they do this and what if in real life, and he just looks
Right.
at me and he's like, "It's those damn thrillers that you keep reading. Stop reading those things," because I will always assume the worst or prepare for the worst.
Mhm.
And I think it's because I read so much about it.
Yeah.
And it's weird when you were saying that I unwind with thrillers, like that sounds so wrong because they're so stressful at times and psychologically unsafe that I don't
Mhm.
know how that's my unwinding, but that's another conversation. But no, I do. I bring it into real life all the time. I'm the worst. I will hypothesize and not make up stories. Like I actually think they're possibilities. And he points it out all the
Mhm.
time. Too many thrillers. Too many thrillers.
Yes, I also live with someone who is often pointing out how I have a tendency to imagine the worst possible outcome of anything. And it's usually mundane. It's like something I witnessed at the supermarket and I put some terrible twist on it. But, I think that it's a way to kind of control the uncontrollable a little bit if you can write the story to the end in your mind, or in our case, write it on the page. But, having said that, I know you mentioned you don't have a calling to be a writer. Um, have you ever considered that, or is that just kind of like you're staunchly, I'm a reader, I'm an influencer, I'm a reviewer, but you just aren't wanting to write?
I think the real truth is I don't know that I'd have enough to write for 80,000 words. Like when I read
Mhm.
your books and I'm like, how did they come up with like all the little details, like the color of the wall in the room that they're in or the shirt that the main character's wearing. Like I guess that's a comes with practice thing, but for me it's like I would have an idea and then that's where it would end. I don't know that I'd be able to write 80,000 words, and I think that's where I get stumped and I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to stick to reading. I think that's where I'm better suited. And laziness maybe, I don't know,
Yeah.
but it's the 80,000 word thing. I'm like, how do you come up with 80,000 words? Like from a simple
Yeah.
idea.
That
Yeah. It can be
that's
daunting.
how we feel every time we sit down to write a new book.
Yeah. Yeah. Just so you know, I was having this conversation, in fact, just last night. I was lucky enough to go to May Cobb was doing an event down at Mysterious Bookshop, and there were a bunch of authors there, and we were talking afterwards, and we were saying that every time we write a book, it's like we've never written a book before. I mean, every time we've done it, and it's still you jump into it, and suddenly it's like, oh, okay, what are we doing here? Whether it's book two,
Mhm.
3, 4, 5, 6, whatever. It's like you kind of forget. You experientially learn things as you go, obviously every time, but when you're jumping into a new book, it really is like your debut every time. So it's kind of a wild thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
Sonika, with the last few minutes as we kind of wrap up, being that you are obviously, very well read and you get things a little bit ahead of time, is there anything coming out, in the next few months or what have you, either authors that are, favorite authors of yours that you're excited for new stuff, or stuff you maybe got an early read on that you're looking forward to, titles?
I mean, there is a book, it's coming out, I think, in January. It's called Trust Issues.
Oh,
I'm really excited for that one. I just got
oh,
it on my e-reader and it's going to be my next commuter read into work.
exciting.
Um,
I've heard the authors are a little bit
I've
dicey,
been waiting a
so
very long time
Yeah.
for their next book, so I'm really excited that this one is finally here in my
okay.
hands. So I'm excited for
Thank
that
you.
one. I'm excited for Jennifer Hillier's new book whenever it comes out
Mhm.
next year. I've been waiting patiently
Us
for
too.
that one. Hannah Mary McKinnon's book that just came out in July was exceptional. Only One
Mm,
Survived. That was a lot of fun. I'm trying to think of what's on my cart upstairs. Oh my gosh, there's so many. Um,
sure.
but
Yeah.
yeah, where do you start? But
Right.
there's so
Right.
many.
That's such a hard question. Whenever anyone asks me that question, it's like all I can think of are the names of movie
Yeah.
titles and food I like to
Mhm.
eat. Like it gets too overwhelming.
Clear out of your head, of course.
I'm like, cookies?
It's so true. My mind drew a blank. I had it all in my head when you were asking the question. I'm like, oh yeah, say that. And then now I don't even know what they were. But definitely trust issues. I'm really excited for your next book. Like, I've been waiting. I'm excited. I think it's going to be great.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, we can't wait to hear what you think. It's amazing to have, friends and fans and people who've read multiple books of ours and are supportive. And yeah, it's also totally nerve-wracking when a book is about to come out and you just have no idea,
right,
how it will be accepted. So thank you for that, boost in confidence.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for spending this time with us. It's been such a pleasure, and you're so well spoken and just a great supporter of authors. So I don't consider you just a reader, even though readers are heroes.
Yes.
But I'm really looking forward to, future panels that you moderate and future interviews that you do, and hopefully being in the same room in real life with you soon.
Yes, one day. I can't believe the one time I didn't go to Thriller Fest. I meant to go, but we had a wedding that weekend, so I couldn't do it. But when I heard you went,
there'll be other Thriller Fests.
Yes, I'm sure there will be.
Well, and we'll come support you in Montreal as well.
Yes.
That'll be
fun.
I'm
going to work on that, because that would be so much fun. And we'll definitely have to do an IG live about trust issues, obviously.
Well, that would be great. Okay, wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Sonica, thank you for being with us. This has been a blast. Where can people find you?
On Instagram, I am at the_reading_beauty. I do have a blog, but it's not quite up to date, so I won't even direct people there. But that's sort of where you can catch me, or on Goodreads as well. See what I'm reading, and yeah, that's where I'm at. But I'm excited for being on your podcast. This has been so much fun, and I'm honored to be one of the non-authors that you've chosen. It's been a lot of fun. You guys are awesome.
You too. Thank you for being here.
You.
That's really, and to echo what Liz said earlier, it really is, like, we do as authors appreciate all of the support and the love and the dedication that you guys put forth in terms of being readers and movie readers, and it's a wonderful community. To your point as well, I think it's between the readers and the authors and all the publishing people, it really is this kind of beautiful community that everyone kind of contributes to. So thank you for being a part of it, and thank you for being on Imposter Hour.
You are so
yes, and to all of our listeners, if you're looking for your next read, definitely check out her Instagram, because it's definitely a place that I've gotten some great recommendations. So if you have that, I don't know what I'm going to read next, highly recommend.
Yes.
So let me take us out. Imposter Hour with Liz and Greg is created and hosted by us, Elizabeth Keenan and Greg Wands. The show is produced and edited by the Bookwild Collective founder, Kate Herget, and Scott Leeds composed our original theme music, and Steve Luoma designed our logo.
You can find us on IG at Imposter Hour Podcast and online at imposterhour.com. Thanks for checking us out.